So in the fourth quarter of this year, 2022, the Vulcan Centaur is going to launch, and that's a commitment that ULA has made to their first customer, who is Astrobotic in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm recording this right now. And this is going to be a mission of paramount importance. The first launch of the Vulcan Centaur is going to be taking the first mission, the first U.S. mission anyway, that has ever landed on the surface of the moon since the Apollo program. This is a huge event for the world, for this country, for NASA, and it cannot go wrong. This is not the sort of test that SpaceX does where they don't care if it blows up on the pad or anything like that. This is one of the most important payloads that ULA has ever carried, and I got to see the Astrobotic Peregrine Lander that's going to be setting down on the moon in a few months up close and personal. And I also got up close and personal with a certain Mr. Bill Nelson, and I got a chance to ask him a question, and I think all of you probably would have liked to have asked. So let's check it out right now.
Well, welcome to Astrobotic. Welcome to our big announcement today where we're going to be unveiling the Peregrine Lander. This is our nation's first lander headed back to the surface of the moon in nearly 50 years since Apollo. And it's just on the other side of the glass here, and I'm going to be showing it in just a second. But first, I want to thank everybody here. We've got some great NASA executives as well as Congressman Cartwright from Northeast Pennsylvania. Real powerhouse that's representing and supporting this return to the surface of the moon, and we're just so honored and excited for you all to be here. So the lander that I'm about to unveil behind us is currently under construction, but nearing its final state. So we're very excited to show that off to the world. This will be flying in Q4 of this year aboard a United Launch Alliance Vulcan launch vehicle, and things are on schedule right now. This will be the first commercial lunar payload services lander to go to the surface of the moon, if all goes well with against our competitors. And the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program is a commercial return to the surface of the moon. It's actually awarded 7 missions already to return to the surface of the moon to go up there. So we're very, very excited to be unveiling the spacecraft here today. So again, the integration and assembly is still underway behind me, and we're just so excited that this spacecraft is going to be leading us back to the surface of the moon. So with that, why don't we take a look at our spacecraft. So right here, as the blinds come up, this is our Class 100K clean room with our spacecraft on the other side. And there she is. This is the Peregrine Lander. This is the lander that will return our nation to the surface of the moon for the first time since Apollo. This lander will carry about 21 payloads to the surface of the moon, a whole series of payloads from NASA that are actually in the foreground right here, as well as commercial payloads. And this lander has a lot of fuel, which is in those big yellow fuel tanks there, wrapped in MOI for insulation. So again, we're just so excited that Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is leading our nation back to the surface of the moon, and this is the spacecraft that's going to get this done. So while we're doing that, I'll just give you a little bit of a tour of the spacecraft while we have an extra minute. The biggest things that you see here are the fuel tanks. So there's 2 fuel tanks on either side, and there's actually a helium tank in the middle that actually pressurizes the spacecraft. Underneath, there's going to be 5 main engines that are going to power the spacecraft to go out to lunar orbit and descend down onto the surface. And then the lander legs, the 4 lander legs, that is what absorbs the landing impact as we land. And importantly, those legs are designed to not bounce. We don't want our lander to bounce when it hits the surface. So there's actually crushable honeycomb inside of there that crushes down and just absorbs that impact, so we get a stick that landing. And looking back, do I keep going a little bit? Yeah. Okay, need another minute. Sounds like a Wi-Fi box resetting back there. So this spacecraft is actually being test fit to an adapter ring over here on the right, which is actually the very top of the United Launch Alliance Vulcan launch vehicle over here on the right. So we're doing a mechanical fit check between the two spacecraft so that we are ready to go down to the launch site at the end of this year and light this sucker up and send it out to the surface of the moon. Just a few of the experiments here in the foreground. This red angled piece over here on the left, this is actually a neutron speck. That's actually a test equipment that is being used to determine the composition and materials of the surface of the moon. And this same instrument is going to be sent on a rover to the pole of the moon on our second mission aboard a NASA rover that will go drill for water ice into the coldest parts of the poles of the moon. We also have a rover over here on the right.
So what he was talking about is the Cube rover right here, which was also designed right in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and this will be the first American rover to start traversing the surface of the moon for over 50 years. It is going to be quite a moment when this thing sets out on the lunar surface. But here's the cool thing about Peregrine and everything associated with it. This vehicle is essentially a lunar taxi. It is carrying other payloads to the surface of the moon by paying customers, and they are paying quite a lot, a minimum of $1 million per kilogram. However, if you wanted to send your own mission to the moon, you would not only have to pay, at least 60-some million dollars for a Falcon 9 flight, you would also need to design your own lander, your own heating system to keep your science package alive at night, that sort of thing. You don't have to worry about that with the Peregrine. So the thought that you can send a science package, albeit a small one, but with micro-miniaturized technology these days, it really doesn't matter, and you can do it for just a few $1 million. Oh, and by the way, if you want your scientific payload to explore a different part of the lunar surface, well, the Cube rover can carry it to a reasonable distance from the Peregrine Lander, and you can explore other parts of the lunar surface. So, for example, if you want this thing to crawl inside a lava tube or something along those lines, this rover is designed to carry that out. It's quite an amazing piece of technology that's going to be going along with the Peregrine Lander, but let's get back to the presentation.
Now it falls to me the wonderful honor of introducing former Senator and NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. This is a man who's a lawyer, who was a successful politician for many years, 3 terms in the United States Senate, but I think the thing that he's proudest of was that he was a payload specialist. John Thornton was talking to you about the payload on this landing module. This man was the payload specialist on the Space Shuttle Columbia as a member of Congress. I give you Administrator, former Senator Bill Nelson.
So when I flew, I was the only lawyer that has flown in space. NASA chose not to publicize that fact. So, half a century ago, Apollo 17 landed on the surface. It was a multi-day mission. It had a rover. It had the first geologist astronaut that was part of the crew, along with the commander, Gene Cernan, half a century ago. Now we're going back to the moon. We're going back to the moon with unmanned landers that are commercial landers. And this summer, we're going back with the largest rocket ever, the Space Launch System with its spacecraft Orion on the top. This is a test mission. It will be uncrewed, and in 2 years, we will have a crew that will go to the moon, and a year after that, we will land on the moon with the first woman and the next man. This one is particularly important for us because it is a commercial part of our public-private partnership. In the civilian space program, of which Matt is the chairman of that subcommittee, about $25 million. That does everything. That does the telescopes, that does the Earth observation, that does all of the medical research, that does the human program. This is very important because their next one that's going in 23 is going to be us landing on the south pole of the moon where the resources are, where water is. And if we have water, we have rocket fuel. So this is an exciting time, and our commercial partners are very much a part of this. And the person that makes this happen for NASA is one of our two bigwigs. The two bigwigs are the two PhDs here. And I want to introduce the head of our science mission director, Dr. Thomas Zerbuka.
I'm really excited to be here also. What a milestone. I'm so proud of you and your entire team to get it this far. You can see a lander, you can see the payload there, and you can taste it, right, almost. And pretty soon we'll be sitting here, chewing off our fingernails and hoping and trusting that everything will go just fine the way it was intended in this entire, from the beginning, landing at the surface of the moon. I love the moon. I love the moon because we can see it most evenings. It's an amazing celestial body. It's right there, linked to the history of Earth in a very direct fashion. The surface of the moon has the historic kind of bombardment history, which without a doubt is also on Earth. The composition is the stuff that we're made out of here on Earth as well. And for us, the moon is the perfect kind of bridgehead to the entire solar system. And so that's why we're so excited. Doing it with commercial and international partners is precisely the way we want to explore, because of the fact that the commercial entities are really a core strength for all of the United States, for the whole the program. We think that's a differentiator for us. I only want to talk about one thing. You're looking at the lander. I want to talk quickly about this, the payload on the side here. First, I want to tell you that those instruments on there, the three instruments, basically are identical to the three core instruments of the Viper rover that will go to the moon, with a second lander that you're going to build here. And you say, why would you do these instruments already here? Well, friends, this is the first rover we've ever built that I've been involved in, and anybody I've talked to, in which the instruments are not on the critical path. Because of the fact that we're bringing it to the surface, we can try it in the right environment, we can develop them faster, and frankly, many of them are two commercial public-private partnerships. With NASA, in one case Kennedy, working with a company from New York and building a mass spectrometer. In addition to that, these payloads are going to go there and tell us, hey, if there's any changes we need to make, we can do that. So I'm really excited about this. Of course, the one there, looking below the surface and actually seeing whether there is water there below the surface. The other one being an infrared measurement that's basically looking at composition at the surface, and then the mass spec, which will be paired with a drill that the next speaker may or may not want to talk about, which of course is coming from the space tech side of the house. So everybody looks at the lander, I look at the payload. So there, that's the difference between kind of the science guy and the person I'm introducing right now. I need to say, I understand we need to do both, because the payloads don't go by themselves to the surface of the moon. What I'm going to do is introduce Jim Reuters, who is the head of space tech and a friend, and of course, in many ways, is a pioneer in so many of these technologies that have enabled this machine. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, thank you, Thomas, and I'm also really excited to be here today. This is a momentous time. I never would have guessed, a few years ago that we'd be talking about commercial landers on the moon, and really so fast. And it just shows that when we do this sort of model, how fast you can go when you allow people to do so. And we compete against each other too. That's a kind of big part. So I was trying to think about getting here. We have a long-standing relationship with Astrobotic. Really a pleasure to have been working with this company since I think 2009. You started around 2007 or so, like that. And I think you started out with mostly in the small business innovative research. It's a program that has spawned and is spawning a large number of industry members really that grow from small into something that's very sizable and vibrant. And I think you won. It was at least 20 or so SBIRs, and in those, I think you've been really strategic about what you've been investing in and pursuing. And they all tie together that appear like it's a long-term strategy. I know you said, I think, Don, that maybe it was all strategy, but that things kind of worked out. But it really looks very well coordinated and thought out. So that the landing, precision landing and navigation activities that you had, and so technologies like that. And it was, the thing I like doing from our standpoint is we try to enable technologies that then can be applied. We really want to be a driver of a space economy as we go through this. And then other things that fit to the rover, but also the wireless charger that we just saw right now that you invested in. A cube rover, a small rover that now you just won another award last night. And so now that's enabling that. I think that you're going to be able to put that on the moon as we go forward. And so a lot of these are just building, and it really is kind of a coordinated effort, it seems. It's all of a long-term strategy of a supplier of logistics and power for the moon. And so it's a great strategy. You never would have guessed when you were starting that where NASA was no longer going to the moon, that would be a critical thing, but now that's really, it's really taking off. So for me, it's a great pleasure to be here. And I look forward to continuing to work with you and everyone here. And with that, John, I think I'll come back to you.
So with that, we'll begin to wrap things up, but I do just want to point out once again that this right here behind me, behind the glass, this is the lander that is returning our nation to the moon for the first time in nearly 50 years. Right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, of all places, this is the lander, this is the team, these are the people behind the glass leading our nation back to the moon, and I can't be more proud to say that over and over again. It really is a very big deal that we're going back. This is just the beginning of a whole series of missions back to the surface of the moon. NASA has contracted 7 commercial missions to go back to the moon over the next several years. So this is just the beginning of a flurry of activity, capstoned, of course, with the Artemis program, with the first woman astronaut to land on the surface of the moon inside of this decade. So an incredibly exciting time to be living and to be dreaming and to be looking up at the moon and to know that it's going to be that much closer and that much more accessible to us all. So with that, I want to thank everybody again for coming out on this very historic day, unveiling a spacecraft that will truly make history on the surface of the moon at the very end of this year. So thank you very much, everybody.
So in case you didn't hear every bit of that clearly, and sorry about the audio, it was just the nature of the room, this is providing logistics and communications for payloads that are making a journey to the moon. So not a probe in itself as much, but rather a safe place for payloads to ride, and on top of that, a secure place that will be able to provide a communications hub for these payloads that are going to be riding on board. A very innovative and unique way of approaching our scouting out the surface of the moon, and they mentioned that Viper mission that's going to the moon in 2023 to the lunar South Pole to find where the ice reserves are on the moon in order for us to start mining the resources of the lunar surface. But the presentation was not quite done because they had a Q&A as well, and I was was the one stupid enough to ask the first question. Jordan Wright, the Angry Astronaut. This is somewhat off topic, and if you don't wish to comment on it, I understand. You've mentioned the SLS. And there are two types of people that I run into when I cover spaceflight. It's either people who don't know that we're going back to the moon, or people who do know and are frustrated about SLS. And I'm just curious, Office of Inspector General just reported that it's an unsustainable price tag for future launches. Does NASA have a plan to rectify this situation, or is it a problem at all?
So your organization is known as Angry Astronaut? How can you be an angry astronaut?
It would take me a while to explain it.
So the IG report is talking about the per unit cost with all of the development cost piled in. When you start adding those flights at one a year over a longer decade, and when you start truing out some of the efficiencies that we are constantly looking for, then the price comes down. But I think one of the reasons that a dozen years ago we started this public-private partnership was so that we could get industry to show the government how you can do things cheaper and still reliable and still, of course, safe. And you take, for example, they're going to launch next year on a Falcon Heavy. SpaceX. It's got 3 Falcon 9s all strapped together. All 3 of those first stages come back and land. And they reuse them. And they're reusing that core stage as much as 11 times. And therefore, it's not a throwaway cost. So as you get on into further spacecraft in the future that are entirely government spacecraft, in addition to the close contracting that we do with commercial spacecraft, you will start to see those costs come down.
Next question.
Question for the Congressman. NASA's put together a $26 billion budget proposal headed towards your subcommittee. What's your first impression of the budget proposal, and what's the schedule looking like in terms of marking up an appropriations bill at the subcommittee and full committee level?
The second question is easier. We intend to do it on time. We've already set up Commerce, Justice, and Science hearing schedule, and we intend to mark it up on time and report the bill on time. Whether the Senate will work as quickly as we do remains to be seen. But I think the success of the FY22 appropriations bill, as delayed as it was, it still succeeded. And I think that gives heart to members of Congress that we can do our job, that we can fund the government, we can avoid shutdowns, and we can do sensible things with compromise between Democrats and Republicans, and we can get the job done. So I'm quite optimistic about the schedule, and I tell you, as I stand right here today, I intend to report the Commerce, Justice, and Science bill on time and on schedule. As far as the President's budget for NASA, the same thing applies to that as applies to every other thing in the President's budget. My old friend Charlie Dent from Pennsylvania, Republican from Allentown, served many years on the House Appropriations Committee, and his favorite expression was about the President's budget. The President proposes and the Appropriations Committee disposes. So we'll be making the hard choices, but you know, what we do on the Appropriations Committee is a product of compromise between Democrats and Republicans, between the House and the Senate. We succeeded last year, we'll succeed again in FY23. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are any other questions?
By the way, I just want to make a comment. Here is an example of where the Republicans and the Democrats get together. The space program, but particularly the space subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. Matt and his ranking Republican, Robert Aderholt of Alabama, they work together. You don't see a lot of this. You see all the fighting that goes on, but it's exactly as Matt said. In certain areas, you get bipartisan compromise and working together.
Thank you. And if there are any questions within the scope of the Peregrine mission, we have time for one more.
Jeff Riddell from WKYC out of Cleveland, from the home of NASA Glenn. I know you're taking up a NASA Glenn experiment on Peregrine, and Griffin is currently at NASA Glenn getting tested. Could you speak to the partnership between you and NASA?
Well, NASA is a great longtime partner of Astrobotic, and NASA Glenn in particular, we've had great partnership because it's just 2 hours from here. Some of the first partnership relations we had there was actually using their slope lab, where they have a fantastic, massive, almost the size of this room, sand pit that can actually be all lifted up on an angle, and you can drive rovers up that slope. So we've done a lot of testing out there at their slope lab. Glenn also has great technology developments that we've been partnered with in the SBIR and STTR program for many years. And we continue to be very excited about that partnership with NASA Glenn and flying together to the surface of the moon. We think that is core and part and parcel to the core of the strength of our region and why we're so excited about a Peregrine flying from Pittsburgh right here.
So guys, here's my takeaway, not only from Administrator Nelson's comment, but the entire spirit of this presentation. NASA believes in private-public partnerships in order to bring costs down. That includes things like Falcon Heavy and SpaceX and reusability for the future, but it also includes companies like Astrobotic that will be able to carry out these important missions at a reasonable cost and save the government enough money on scouting the lunar surface, on providing resupply, logistics, and other things that Artemis is definitely going to need in order to guarantee sustainability on the moon. Astrobotic, SpaceX, and everybody else involved in this project are going to be instrumental in keeping costs down so that the high price that SLS represents to this program won't sink it. I think it's a good plan. It was an interesting answer to a question that I wasn't sure whether or not they would even make a comment on, and I was very thrilled that they gave me that opportunity. So until every other company associated with Artemis realizes that it's going to take this kind of innovation in order to successfully return to the moon, this time to stay, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.